First up, we have a few folks that we introduced earlier, but first, Imhof is the General Counsel for the Florida Bar. He's been employed by the Florida Legislature for over 30 years in both the Senate and House of Representatives. He's former chair of the Continuing Education Committee, former chair of the Administrative Law Section, and former chair of Government Lawyer Section of the Florida Bar. And he's currently as a member of the Government Lawyer Section Executive Council. Aimee Diaz-Lyon is an attorney with over 18 years of experience in legislative and governmental affairs. She represents clients before the legislative and executive branches of Florida government, including regulatory boards and commissions, with an emphasis on healthcare and judicial issues. They're going to be talking to you about the bar legislative initiatives, and if I could just say that whether you know it or not, they're responsible for protecting our branch of government from some of the things we've seen, and they deserve a round of applause for that. And Booter is the person that if you have legislative proposals, he'll keep you out of trouble. I constantly call him and say, "Hey, are we in trouble? What do we need to do to stay out of trouble?" So I know he's got more important things to do than talk to me, but he's always been picked up the phone and talked to me and been nothing but the best person in the world to talk to you about these sorts of things. So without further ado, Booter and Aimee.
Well, Aimee and I are going to tag team, and I have to correct Greg. I don't have anything more important than to talk to you guys. So, so please call if you have any questions. That's what I'm here for. And as you know, we're a mandatory unified bar, and that means you're required to have membership here in the Florida Bar as opposed to being a voluntary member. And that actually, there's 32 states in the District of Columbia have mandatory bars. But it's getting, every now and then there's a big movement to kind of attack the mandatory bars, and that's what we're seeing right now. Currently there were changes in the status out there in California and also in Nebraska, and there's challenges in several other states, Wisconsin, Arizona, and I'm trying to remember some of the others, but the one that's of particular interest is a case coming out of North Dakota, Freck v. Wecht. Wecht is the president of the North Dakota Bar Association. And so that one actually came through the 8th Circuit Court. They upheld the lobbying for North Dakota, but then the Goldwater Institute out of I think they're in Arizona is pushing to decertify or demandatory, make everybody a voluntary bar, and so that it will be on. They filed a writ of certiorari with the Supreme Court, and they're actually going to have a conference to see whether they're going to accept that writ. That will be probably middle of September. So stay tuned for that. Here's what it looks like across the country. Mandatory by statute. Of course, we are mandatory by the Supreme Court, and then some states have kind of a mandatory and voluntary. The mandatory and voluntary now, we need to add California to that because they just made those changes. And Nebraska also, they've got kind of an interesting situation out there. So that's what's happening. And we, of course, are regulated by the Supreme Court. That's the bar's boss, and it's constitutional. And the rules regulating the Florida Bar are on the website, right up on the top bar. And I commend you to read through those because there's a lot of good stuff in there. And they authorize the Board of Governors to establish and maintain our program of legislation. And here's the case law in Florida. It's been kind of a leader of the mandatory bar restrictions. Started off with what we call the Swartz case, and it established the criteria for the big bar. Not necessarily for the sections. The sections have a little more leeway, but the big bar we can only address questions concerning the regulation and discipline of attorneys. matters relating to the improvement and functioning of the courts, that sort of thing. Increasing the availability of legal services to society, the regulation of attorney-client trust funds, the education, ethics, competence, integrity, and regulation of the legal profession as a whole. So you can see that it's very, very tight. There are, after the Swartz case came the Keller versus the State Bar of California. Keller sued the State Bar about several of their legislative positions, and the U.S. Supreme Court established that a compelled association within a unified bar is justified by the state's interest in regulating the legal profession and improving the quality of legal services, and that's kind of the watchword between nationwide from the Supreme Court. So we can constitute the challenges were from First Amendment freedom of speech and freedom of association. The State Bar may therefore constitutionally fund activities germane to these goals of mandatory fees of all members, but may not, however, in such manner fund activities of an ideological nature which fall outside those areas of activity. And the Board of Governors has a legislation committee that is very tight on reviewing what we call the Swartz Criteria as far as the big bar's activities. The Swartz did come and say if the legislation does not fall into those narrow criteria, that there could be a possibility where the bar could go outside those. After reading the Frankel case, which was a follow-up case to the Swartz, it was decided after the Keller case. I think that this is, even though we have this kind of guidelines, it's very, very tight, very tight. And I commend both those cases to you guys to read and just kind of get a feel for where our Supreme Court is coming down on legislative criteria. Our Government Affairs Office, like I said, was Greg. We are here to help. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. So give us a call if you have any questions. One of the things about the sections, let's see, I thought I had something on that in here, but we coordinate the legislative activities with the Metz firm, which do an outstanding job. Like Greg and Michelle said, they really did an outstanding job on the last legislative session. There was several really bad bills that essentially did not get, they got one hearing, and that was about it. And then, and Aimee will talk to you about that. We were talking earlier, I've got the boring stuff, and then Aimee's got kind of the exciting stuff. So her stuff will be a lot better once she gets up here. So I'm putting the pressure on her. Of course, we advise elected leaders on various government issues in coordination with Aimee and Jim Doughton over at the Metz firm. And then, of course, we serve as an information resource. We've got stuff on the website under the legislative thing, the legislative page. That's what I'm looking for. And so if you can't find it, which sometimes I have a hard time finding it, give me a call. I'll direct you to get there. We try to put all kinds of information on there, especially important dates that we've got. This year, the legislature's meeting in their regular time, which is March and April of next year. It's the end of the biennium. I know you all got letters from Joni in our office talking about sunsetting the positions and re-upping those. Of course, everybody, and Aimee will talk about this, but the general election in November, there won't be any legislative activity before that because everybody in the House running for re-election and half of the Senate's running for re-election, and that doesn't even count the governor and everybody else. Here's our links And if you want a copy of our presentation, just send me an email, and I'll be happy to send it to you, so you'll have those direct links. And we try to keep you as informed as possible. Here's the section slide I was looking for. The kind of the restrictions on the bar is talking about mandatory fees and mandatory dues. So since the sections are voluntary, the courts have held that you guys have a little bit more leeway in dealing with the legislature than the big bar. There's voluntary membership and separate funds. And you have to take positions that involve stuff that's in your wheelhouse. I mean, the criminal law section can't go off on doing something, or the animal law guys. I had to use you. And it cannot be divisive among a substantial segment of the bar. And under the standing board policies of the board, here is where I kind of get my authority, and the board and you guys get your authority as far as your legislation. And the section may be recognized by the Board of Governors taking action on and advocating a position when these following criteria are met. One is that the issue is included within your wheelhouse. The issue is either an issue that the big bar can address, or if a big bar can't, then it's an issue that is within the scope of your of your section, and then the issue is not one that carries a deep philosophical, emotional issue with the bar. That's always a hard one to ascertain. Sometimes it's controversial, but a lot of people support it. So that's kind of an issue. That actually came directly from the Swartz case, because even though they didn't require the bar to talk about a division, they said they wanted the bar to consider that anytime it came up for big bar and section stuff. Our legislation committee with the Board of Governors meets at every meeting of the Board of Governors, and Mike Tanner from Jacksonville is the chair. Gary Lesser, immediate past chair, is the co-chair, and then Larry Sellers from Tallahassee will be the chair-elect. And you can see when we've got a form on the website. I'm probably going to try to redo it a little bit on it, but we ask you to fill out that form, send it to us, and then we forward it on to the legislation committee, and then they take it up and apply these criteria to the legislation. And then if it's not, if it falls in the criteria, then they say we will not prohibit the section from doing it. It's really not an approval. It's just the opposite. It's saying you guys go ahead, because nothing's going to prohibit you from doing it. And these are the rest of the people. And then next is Amy.
Yes.
And she's going to talk to you about. Do you guys have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you do the same for the voluntary bars, or just the section?
Just the section, just the sections and the big bar. I can give you some advice, so I mean, if you want to call. Yes, sir.
On the constitutional amendments, is the bar taking a position on those and going to be publishing it to the rest?
We are not going to be taking a position on the constitutional amendments. It's not really in our wheelhouse. Steve Metz from the Metz firm helped the bar during the CRC process. It did an outstanding job of really preventing any bad constitutional amendments from getting on the ballot. So there's really nothing for the bar to address. There might be some issues that sections are concerned about, and if you do have that, let me know. We'll fill out a form and get it through the process. Yes,
Booter,
Rob,
obviously we have...
You handsome guy, you have out of the way. Just
well, yeah. we were separated at birth. Obviously, we have the big bar lobbying, and some sections have lobbying teams of their own. I don't know how many sections actually have their own lobbyists? Is it most of the folks in this room? Very small? What are the numbers?
It's a small number. Real property, of course, business,
Real property, business, family law,
workers' comp.
trial lawyers, workers' comp, elder, public interest. So maybe 7 or 8 of all the sections actually have a paid tax, right? Tax just had one. Yeah.
And tax.
And tax. So maybe 8 sections. So
Anybody?
It's a small number.
Anybody else?
And to that point, for those sections that don't have lobbyists, we're here to help. So please call Booter and I, and we can kind of help direct you, kind of who to talk to, et cetera.
And of course, all the caveats do not address you personally. I mean, there's no restriction on lawyers, going and asserting their First Amendment rights to talk to the legislators and stuff, as long as you're doing it on your own. But once you want to have the support of the bar or your section, you do have to go through the legislative process that the bar has set up. But individually, there's no restriction on you guys doing whatever you want to do with your legislators.
No other questions? Okay. Can you all hear me with this? Oh, great. Okay. Well, as Booter mentioned, he got the short end of the stick. He got to talk to you about this dry legal stuff, which of course you want to follow. But I get to talk to you this morning a little bit about the changes in Tallahassee and the 2018 election, what we did this past legislative session from a big bar that actually impacted, I think, a lot of the sections, and you all were helpful on some of these issues. And then, of course, what we see in 2019. So first, I'll start a little bit with what we're going to see in the 2018 in the 2018 election. My one piece of advice: turn off your TVs now. The campaign ads are just about to start, and you're going to start seeing them for the next 3 months. Overseas ballots have already been mailed for the primary. Last election cycle, 70% of the folks, about 70% of the folks voted prior to election day, right? So the messages are just going to start coming now, and you're just going to see a lot of noise. But big picture, what I think that means for all of us in this room is there's some great opportunity. And that's because of term limits and all of these elections coming up mean there's going to be new folks in office that you all in your sections can educate. As you see kind of this, I put this slide up here to kind of show you the impact of term limits. So when term limits went into effect in 2000, we really just started to see this turnover. Very few legislators have been around that long. So if your section did a piece of legislation 10 years ago, like, oh, we worked on it, we worked with all these legislators, et cetera, chances are that the legislators that you worked with 10 years ago are no longer in the legislature. Right? And so that presents some opportunity, I think, for the sections to really get to know your local legislators. Go get your section members. I'm sure your legislative chairs are all doing this, but get to know your local legislators. Get to know, develop some champions, 1 or 2 folks. A lot of the sections through the years, particularly the sections that don't have lobbyists, to your point, how do you do it? How do you go get a piece of legislation filed, right? Well, go find a local legislator, particularly some of these new folks that are trying to find their way, some brand new attorneys, et cetera, and get to know them and try to develop them as a champion. The other thing that I will mention in terms of term limits is the staff pretty much has not changed. So a lot of the staff that we work with, that Booter and I and the team work with day in and day out, the healthcare staff, the judiciary staff, the education staff, the criminal justice staff, the civil justice staff, have been there for a long time, and they do have institutional memory, right? So you can go to them and say, X section did, I'm with X section, et cetera, and talk to them. Most legislators, as an aside, don't really know the difference between a section and a big bar, right? They just think everybody's an attorney. You're either a trial lawyer or you're a criminal defense, right? They're just not kind of tuned into the difference between the sections. So a lot of what we do a lot of time is they'll call Booter or my team and they'll say, hey, we've got this issue that we need some help. And so we will try to then turn it around if it's a criminal law or a family law or a reptile issue or whatever, and make sure that we get it to the appropriate folks for you. But my piece of advice for all of you all and for your legislative chairs is get to know those staff people and call Booter and I. Say, hey, I want to get to know the judiciary staff. Who should I call? We'll give you that name and pick up the phone and just say, hi, I'm the chair-elect of the section, fill in the blank section, and I'd like to offer myself as a resource to you. So when you get a bill that deals with this area of law, please call me. We can find you an expert to testify. We can have somebody review that legislation for you. We can provide technical advice, not take a position, but we can provide good technical advice. We can find that constitutional lawyer on that issue, et cetera. And you'll find that the legislative staff will be very appreciative of that. So that's kind of one thing that term limits has done, is get to know your local legislators and then get to know the staff in your particular area. So big changes in Tallahassee. We've not seen this in a long time. Governor, Agriculture Commissioner, and Attorney General Bondi are all termed out. And so we're going to see new faces in that. CFO Jimmy Petronis, it'll be his first time on a statewide ballot. He was recently appointed to this position. And so lots and lots of changes in Tallahassee, which I think provides good opportunities. So for those of you all that, that deal with the Attorney General's office, we're going to have somebody new in the Attorney General's office. Call us up. We'll get you the right staff person in that area and go talk to them. Get to know those folks in that area. Very quickly, I won't go into much detail on each of these races, but just kind of wanted to point them out to you because everybody's talking about them, right? We're going to have a new governor. Adam Putnam, Commissioner Putnam versus Ron DeSantis are kind of the leading two Republican nominees. Sands have shifted a little, and it's a very, very close race. So really, anybody's race right now, and I honestly can't predict who's going to win, but it'll one of these two will be the Republican nominee. And then on the Democratic side, again, also a very, very crowded field, really kind of an open race. It could be anybody's race right now. So stay tuned. After August, we'll see who the two nominees are, and then again after November, who wins. Attorney General, I'll mention very quickly, you probably, many of you may have even worked with some of these individuals. These are familiar faces to us. Representative White and Representative Shaw have both been legislators that we've worked with a lot. Many of you may know Ashley Moody. We're going to have a change in the Attorney General's office. So exciting in terms of opportunity for us and for the bar to get to know these individuals. The Florida Commissioner, Agriculture Commissioner, is not talked about a lot, and actually this is the first time that there's actually a Republican primary in this race. So again, a crowded race, and it's really anybody's race. I can't predict right now who's going to win the Republican nominee. Many of you guys, of course, know Nikki from her time and her service at the bar. So she is running for Agriculture Commissioner, and we'll see in November who wins. And then lastly, probably the least talked about office is the Chief Financial Office. I mentioned former Representative and now CFO Petronis is the Republican or will be the Republican nominee most likely, and he's the incumbent, so he's kind of favored just because he's the incumbent, et cetera. But Jeremy Ring is a former senator and is running against him, and so we'll see what happens in November. So big picture, lots of change in Tallahassee. The one thing really that's not changing, however, is the structure and the makeup of the legislature. As you see, unlike what you see on TV, everybody looks at TV and they think, oh, we're blue, we're red, we're purple, right? In Tallahassee, we're pretty much red all the time. We are heavily Republican, almost 2/3, 1/3. And so there'll be a little bit of change, I predict, this legislative session, but the Republicans will stay in control. And so the Republican leaders that we know are coming are going to be the Senate President and the Speaker, which I'll talk about a little later. But that's important to know in terms of your talking points, in terms of things that are important to them. Be thinking of those as you're trying to develop a legislative program if you want to be proactive. As I mentioned, get to know your local legislators, and if I had to pick people to go get to know, here are your Senate leaders. You've got incoming President Bill Galvano. As an aside, again, because we like change in Florida, the committees and the Senate President and Speaker of the House, they change every 2 years. So right now we have no idea who your, for example, Senate Judiciary Chair is going to be, or your Senate Criminal Justice Chair, or your Senate, Health Care, Education Chair, et cetera. So we're going to know that probably not till December. But at that point, if you've got legislation that you're working on or you're hearing about, call us up and we'll direct you into the right place. But right now, it's a little hard to predict who are the targeted legislators in your area. But once November and once President Designate Galvano appoints those people, that'll give you kind of a targeted list, like go meet with everybody on the Senate Judiciary Committee, for example. President Galvano has been, I will say, a great supporter and champion of the Florida Bar and the court system in general. For those of you all that were at convention, he came and spoke at the Judicial Luncheon and really has been a friend to the profession. And so we're excited. He is our next Senate President. Wilton Simpson will be the incoming Senate President in 2 years. Again, everybody changes in 2 years. Travis Hudson and Kathleen Pasadomo. Many of you all may know them. Kathleen is an attorney in the Naples area. They are vying to be the Senate President after that. And then you've got Audrey Gibson, who will be from the Jacksonville area, who will be the Senate minority leader come in November. So these are the folks really to get to know. If I had to pick 5 people, these are the folks to get to know right now. House leaders, same thing. They change every 2 years, and we don't know yet who those committee chairs are going to be, but we do know who the leaders are. You've got Representative Jose Oliva from Hialeah area is going to be your incoming speaker. And then, interesting, you've got 2 attorneys come in after them, so that's exciting. Representative Sprouse, many of you all know, and Representative Renner from the Palm Coast, Jacksonville area. And then our minority leader also is going to be an attorney next year. That is Keone McGee from the Miami area. So if you had some House members to get to know, here's the folks that I would highly recommend. So now that we've talked a little bit about kind of who to know and the elections, et cetera, I wanted to give you all kind of a preview or kind of talk a little bit about the issues that we talked about from the Big Bar's perspective in 2018, because many of them impact your sections. And to be honest with you, many of you guys helped, for example, on judicial term limits. So these are the Big Bar issues that we worked on last year and will most likely be working on this year, and we may be soliciting your help. So, court funding. Who knows how much we have an approximately $88 billion budget. How much do you think in court funding is the budget for the court system in general, the whole court system? Anybody have percentage? 1, 5, 10. Any guesses? 1%. 1%. Less than 1%. It's pretty amazing when you talk to folks. The budget is $88.7 billion, and the judicial branch operates for $539 million. So about 0.7% I think we've done, but less than 1% the third branch of government, right? So that's pretty astounding, right? Most people probably don't know that. And when we talk to legislators, by the way, they don't know that either. So a couple of $1 million, if you can imagine, means a lot to the court system, right? So if you're Medicaid and you're $20+ billion, $1 million or $2 million doesn't really matter that much to you. Don't tell them I said that. If you are the court system and you operate for $540 million, $2 million means a lot to you. So one of the things that we try to do when we ask the sections to help us, particularly the sections that have lobbyists, is to help us with court funding, to ensure that the courts are adequately funded to the levels that they need to make sure all of your members can get to court and practice law. 2 years ago, they had a cut to their budget of $2 million, which was a big deal. So we worked with the branch hand in hand to restore that, and that was a great victory. We also, the legislature, I should say, also increased 2 years ago pay increases for all judges, and this past year did another bump for the Florida Supreme Court in anticipation, of course, of the 3 vacancies that are going to be coming up in January. So court funding is something that we are going to be highly visible and working on. So if this is something that's important to your section, please contact Booter and I, and we would love the help in this area. Florida bar dues for the government lawyers in particular. This is something that we work on, and it's a little language. We don't like to share or talk too much about it, by the way. But we get this little language in the back of the bill that really allows the state agencies at their discretion to be able to pay for bar dues and CLEs. And of course, this is something that's important to state attorneys, public defenders, and other governmental lawyers. So this is something that we work on to ensure every year. Judicial term limits. So first, I want to say thank you to all of the sections on this. Almost every single section took a position against judicial term limits, and that was extremely helpful, because when I went to go lobby the issue, for example, in the Senate, I was able to say, this is not just a big bar issue. This is your your dirt lawyers, your family lawyers, your criminal lawyers, your all different types, your government, your administrative, all of these different lawyers from all across believe that judicial term limits is not right for the state of Florida. And that actually was the most impactful message we had. And so I know all of the all of your positions have sunsetted, so none of us have a position right now on judicial term limits. I don't know if the bill's coming back. Many of you all know Speaker Corcoran was most publicly for judicial term limits. Not sure right now if Speaker Designated Oliva is going to be pushing that. We're going to have to wait and see. But if it is something that I think we will be coming back and asking you all to review and see if you're going to take a position. And it's something that we worked on and will continue to work on together. We had this little bill, I'll just briefly mention this, little bill by Julio Gonzalez, Representative Gonzalez, who's no longer going to be in the legislature, that basically urged Congress to say, if a law is deemed unconstitutional, Congress can come back and say, never mind, it's not constitutional, it's okay. So we worked against it. It actually never got a hearing, so that's really good. Since Representative Julio Gonzalez is not going to be in the legislature, I don't anticipate it comes back, but you never know. Another legislator may take this up. So this is another issue that if your section is concerned about, let us know, and we're going to be working on that. JNCs. Some of you all may have heard about the Jnc legislation. We had a lot of activity this year on JNCs. Lots of different views, lots of different bills. You'll see lots of different sponsors. I won't go too much into detail, but to say 2 of the bills took the Florida Bar basically out of the process, which of course is of concern to the Florida Bar. And shocker, right? So we work to educate staff on why the Florida Bar's role in the JNC process is so important. And so this is something we do anticipate will be coming back next year, and we're going to be working on. And if this is an issue, again, to your section that you feel important on, we welcome the opportunity, the help on the ground, the help from the sections, the help grassroots, et cetera, because I do believe that over the next couple of years, the JNC process will become more visible, and we're going to see more of these type bills. If I can get it to turn. Now these next 2 bills, the Florida Bar did not take an official position on, but I mention them because it's one of the types of bills that I think impact almost everybody in this room. County court jurisdiction. That bill, we had, you'll see various versions from the beginning when it was filed. You know, they said first 25,000, and then the Senate had 100,000, and then they went to 50, and then they went back to 25, and that's how sausage gets made, right? But this is a bill that's most likely coming back. So they're going to raise it. It hasn't been raised in a long time, and so just with the COLA, there's a pretty good argument out there that it needs to be adjusted. The question is, how much? And I cannot predict because it's the legislature, right? And there's going to be compromises and negotiations and which cases go direct to the DCA and which cases will go to circuit court, all of those kind of things. And so, if this is something that's important or impacts your session, let us know. We will keep you updated. Booter and I will keep you updated on it. It may be something that you want to take a position on one way or the other and ask the Board of Governors to be able to take a position on. To my knowledge, I don't think anybody took a position this past year, but it is something that's coming back. So I wanted to mention it because I know it is important to many of you. The other issue kind of ties to what Michelle talked about earlier in terms of criminal justice. There is definitely a move to do some criminal justice reform by the legislature, and this was the first piece they did. Representative Sprowls, if you'll remember, he's the incoming, he will be the speaker in 2 years. This was something that was very important to him. He worked with Senator Brandes, and they're going to be collecting a lot of data with regards to kind of what's currently happening in the criminal justice system. And I believe we're going to see, as a result of that data, probably some legislation coming up. So stay tuned on that. The other issue I wanted to talk about, which is something that always is talked about in the legislature, and again, we didn't have I guess we did have a formal position to support the court, is the Supreme Court certification of judges. Every year, as you know, the Supreme Court will issue an opinion requesting certification of either addition or deletions, including this year they had some deletions, but additions or deletions of judges in different areas, and it, of course, is hotly debated, as you can imagine. And so we anticipate that this issue, particularly at the county court level, since there was some decertifications at that, recommendations at that level, that we're going to see this coming back again next year. So stay tuned. So lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about important dates. Booter already talked about this, but this really is kind of your legislative calendar, really. And so particularly for those of y'all that don't have lobbyists, obviously, we've got to get through the elections, and everybody's, back home doing elections right now, so they're not thinking legislative, as Booter mentioned. But come November, they're going to wake up and be like, oh, there's a legislative session. How many bills? What should I file? As a side note, House members, and we think the rules are going to be the same, House members can only file 6 bills. So if you can imagine, if you're a legislator, guess how many people are coming to you and asking you to file bills? A lot of lobbyists. And then a lot of constituents, right? A lot of friends, a lot of folks. So they are getting kind of asked from all sides. So I always say you pass your bills in the summer. And what that means is if your section wants to pass a proactive piece of legislation, I would not wait until after the the elections, because by then you're going to meet with a House member and they're going to be like, oh yeah, my slots are filled. So what you want to do is between now and the November elections, kind of identify those legislators, go see those legislators and get them. Well, first get approval from the big bar, of course, as Booter will say. But after you've done that, go visit with your legislators. Because once November hits, they're going to come into organizational session 2 weeks after the election via the Constitution. They're mandated to. They're all going to come back. We're going to have a lot of new people. They're all going to get sworn in. They're going to learn, where their offices is, where their parking spaces is. They're going to figure all that out, and then they're going to get down to work. Because the legislative session begins in March, and it is only a 60-day legislative session. And so if they're going to pass a bill, they've got 4 months to do that. And if you can imagine, you've got to file a bill, you've got to get it to bill drafting, you've got to get it filed with a bill number, then you've got to get it referenced to committee, then it's got to go through the committee process, it's got to have a staff analysis, it's got to have a hearing, it's got to get to the floor, it's got to pass one chamber, it's got to go to the other chamber. So pretty lengthy process to get a bill done. So I recommend you start early. In December, January, and February is the best time to go visit with staff. So as I mentioned before, go get to know the staff in your area or have your legislative chair go reach out to the section, or you call as the chair or the chair-elect. December, January, and February are the best times because they are just getting bills filed. They're just learning about their issues. They've now know who their committee chairs are. They know what the committee kind of purpose is, et cetera. So do it during that time. And then, of course, March 5th is the bill filing deadline. And so on March 5th, we hope, except for amendments, et cetera, we'll know what bills are filed. And that's where you go on the website that, that Booter, and it takes a lot of time, I'll tell you, for Joni and Booter to go through there, but they are very meticulous and they take every bill that's filed and they put it in a category. And I really encourage you all to use that tracking system. It's fantastic and will keep you posted on bills. Now, if it's like, I don't know, April 2nd, and you're like, oh my God, that bill affects me. What's happening? What should I do? Feel free to call Booter and I. Call us up. We'll tell you the scoop. We'll figure it out. We'll get you to the right person. We can absolutely help direct you in that area. And then, hopefully, fingers crossed, they finish on time this year, which means they'll be done on May 3rd, and hopefully we'll all be celebrating at that point. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, and this is something really that you all can use for your membership, we want to make the legislative program visible to your members. We think it is an important piece of what we do here at the Florida Bar, and we think it's a benefit to your members. Even for those of you all that don't have lobbyists, we want, and for those of you that have lobbyists, we want to make this as easy as possible for you to know what is happening and share that information to your members so that your section shows value, right? So we have a lot of ways we're going to try to communicate besides obviously calling Booter and I. Obviously the bar website, as I mentioned, is a fantastic tool. Go to that if you can find it. Go to the government affairs website and you can get all that tracking information in that tracking system. We're going to have presidential messages, so you're going to be hearing from Michelle on those legislative issues, those high-profile issues, for example, if it was judicial term limits, et cetera. Florida Bar News, the team, Mark, Gary, all of them at the Florida Bar News do a great job during the legislative session of kind of identifying those legislative issues, and you may open the Bar News and be like, oh, no, I didn't know that. I better call. So keep a look at the Bar News. And then lastly, or the last two things is the weekly legislative updates. Booter and I and the team, we do a weekly legislative update that we email out to the section chairs. Right? Aren't they on the list? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big long list.
It's a big long list. Okay. So weekly during the legislative section, you're going to get an email from us. And it's going to have all the big issues with links and stuff. Feel free to flip that out to your membership, your executive team, et cetera. And then lastly, as I've mentioned, call or email anytime. So I think I've probably run over because I like to talk, but I guess we're still in good shape. Okay, well, I'm happy to answer any questions, and if not, I'll just turn it back over.
I got a couple things I want.
Oh, you want to mention?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Just a quick a couple things. One of the things about is just kind of into the legislative process kind of thing. If you want to support legislation, you got to get a bill on both sides of the because Aimee mentioned it's only 60 days. It's really the shortest regular session for a big state in the country. Even though we do meet every year, 60 days is just not enough. So they start, as Aimee mentioned, they start working early. But if you don't have, you got to get a Senate bill and a companion House bill. Otherwise, it's just not enough time to get the bills through the process. The deadlines that Aimee talked about, the first day of session is a bill filing deadline, but actually the deadlines are before that. Both the House and the Senate have bill drafting office deadlines that the members have to get their bills into. They usually post that on their websites. It's myfloridahouse.gov and then the flsenate.gov. So be aware of that. The first day of session is not really. It's only a deadline because if you don't have your stuff in there, you can't get it in after that. But the deadlines are actually way before that. But they won't start. The deadlines won't start until the organizational session, which is 2 weeks after the general election. Members can't file bills right now even though they will be getting, like Aimee said, getting ideas, and we'll have them in bill drafting, but they won't be filed. And then also on the staff, not only the committee staff are important, but the members' staffs are important. And just because you make an appointment with a House or Senate member, and you can't see the member themselves, don't worry about that. See the staff, see their legislative assistants, because they will brief their members on different issues and stuff, and they're very, very important, and treat them well. Bill tracking, both the Senate and the House websites have real good bill tracking systems too. So you can not only use us, but you can also, if you have a specific bill that you're trying to track for your section or for your own personal use, go in there and sign up for their tracking systems, and they send you an email, and they do a really good job. And that's only the additions I wanted to add. So we're finished.
Thank you very much. I can't help but chime in too. Having been up here in Tallahassee, I can't pretend to understand the legislative process as much as those two, but we get to see a little bit of how the sausage is made. The weekly updates that are great. I appreciate getting those, and so I could see what was going on. Our section. They also get shared on social media, and our section would share that with our memberships through social media, so that's something you may want to consider. And yeah, I'd just highlight Buter's comment about getting started early. I know that in the animal law section, we've voted on the propositions we want to support for next March, and we're starting to go through the process now and getting the forms over there. So the earlier you start, the better off you're going to be.